Hello and welcome to our latest Informatica webinar. My name is Thomas Brent. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for Data Quality and Governance here at Informatica. Today we'll be discussing the 5 foundational elements of a successful enterprise data governance program. Now, before we get started, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. First, we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll try to address as many as we can here today. If you'd like to have your question answered, go ahead and submit it in the question pane in your viewing window. In addition, please also check out the attachment pane in your viewing window to download a copy of today's slide. We also put a couple other goodies over there for you, so check those out. Now, without further delay, let's go ahead and get started. On today's webinar, joining me is Pat DeWald, who is our Senior Director of Data Governance Strategy here at Informatica. First off, let me start by saying thank you, Patrick, for being with me today. We're all very excited to hear what you have to share with us. Pat, why don't you go ahead and get started? Tell us a little bit about it and go through your presentation.
Well, thank you, Thomas, and very excited to present today on the exciting topic of data governance. I wanted to start with maybe a bit of a step back and a reflection on why this data governance practice and what's the vision for it. In enterprise data management, there's already so many disciplines. So you're probably all doing some quality measurement. You're probably all doing some metadata management. Of course, there's the IT and architecture practices. You're all looking at architecture, you're all looking at movement of data and ETLs. Probably there's compliance and privacy practices that come into play nowadays. So there's already a lot of practices, and all of a sudden this data governance practice seems to be more and more important. And oddly enough, it is that the data governance practice is the one that's going to start connecting the dots across all the other practices. And so it's really the enabler for the firm to do better around data. Yeah? So what would allow us to do better in large firms? In the classical governance space, do we need just more owners and stewards? Is that going to move the needle, really? Do we need more policies? Do we need more frameworks, more operating models? Do we more measurements, more definitions? We could have a lot more, and a lot of first-generation data governance efforts have added a lot more. But it hasn't really moved the needle much. It wasn't all of a sudden, hey, we're now better off. Things are easier. We're leaner and meaner. No, it was often the opposite. And so what was missing from these first generation attempts was it wasn't really a practice that enabled others. It was establishing, it was always adding. And so what we want to do is not for the data governance practitioners to be successful. No, we want to enable for everybody else to be successful. And that comes into 2 capabilities. One is around better understanding what's going on. So the understanding, the knowledge piece is absolutely critical. And once we're better informed, then hopefully we can be more joined up in general, but equally across the other practices. Yeah? So data governance should be about enabling. And in order to successfully enable, we definitely have an understanding piece and an alignment and collaboration piece. And not just in governance, but across all the efforts. But there's some challenges in that. So it's one thing to say, hey, let's enable the firm to do better, but what are the obstacles, the profound obstacles in it? One is, of course, that we can have a lot of understanding and promote a lot of collaboration, but there's still people that need to come forward and participate. And there's still people with their own personal aspirations, their own personal agenda, their own targets, et cetera, that need to participate. So there's definitely a people element and a people challenge in that, and people will need to engage. And for them to engage, that will require potentially change in behavior. That also will need to require an exchange of value. People typically don't just engage because they're told to or because there's policy, but there needs to be an exchange of value. What do they get into return? And once there's value, then people will come back for that engagement. But we also, to be successful, to really move the needle in large firms, we need to be able to do that at scale. Not just for a few stewards, or for the CDO function, or for the data management folk in general. No, we're only going to be data-driven as a firm, as everybody in the firm is better equipped, is more responsible when it comes to data, is better aligned. So we need to absolutely get across across all disciplines, all of the business functions, and there's a lot of diversity in that as well. So democratization of knowledge around data and democratization of the data assets itself is absolutely key to really drive towards an organization that's going to be more data-driven. Yeah? So these are quite severe challenges, but we feel at Informatica that we have a good 5 foundational elements to not only overcome those, but bring a solution that hangs together, that is credible, and will excite your organization and deliver value. Okay, let's dig into the first one. So in order for you to be successful, you will need to break out of that first generation governance approach. You have to break out of the governance silo. Yeah? In its very nature, data is a horizontal problem. So if you're going to solve it with some sort of an add-on, a parallel universe, a parallel community and effort and governance arrangement and workflows and organization, that is not going to work. Yeah? And we often see in these first generation efforts that there's a worshipping of the governance artifacts. So let's create definitions and create operating models and create policies, but it's an artifact that is not that is disconnected often from the business reality. That's a lot more fluid. That's a lot more diverse than kind of an aspirational to-be state. And when you get stuck in the data governance silo, you typically also only cater to the data folk. And as already outlined, we want the whole firm to be data-driven. In the modern firm, data is the bloodline of the modern firm. Most members of staff would have interactions, would have touch points with data. So actually we need to get most of them engaged, and not just those that are already well skilled to do so. And so that also means that we need to break out of the stewardship community and even the stewardship apps. The narrow stewardship app have a very narrow focus around that governance community, around these classical data governance artifacts, but we need to go beyond. We need to provide context, we need to break it open, we need to bring people into the conversation and not just preach data governance artifacts, policies, and the likes. The route to value is understanding why the data is in the firm in the first place, how it's going to help, how is it going to serve, what is the path to value. So business relevance, materiality are absolutely key, and we need to collaborate with those running the firm and not just create a silo and pipe in some stewards. So wanted to, after each of these foundational elements, have a quick outline of a real-life case study that in recent years that we've delivered that had some of these symptoms. So the governance silo, this was a very large financial institution with what seemed a very solid classical governance program, all concepts within the bank nicely defined. They all had owners and stewards. They had 1 million workflows. All changes went through that workflow, but it was, again, it was a parallel universe. It was that silo. And 3 years into it, all of a sudden, kind of a lot of money spent, a lot of effort spent, and there was more and more almost like a revolt from those in the business saying, hey, this is all very data-centric. This is data artifacts and governance artifacts for the governance sake. Things are not really easier. It's still as difficult as it was before to make sense of things, to change things. I need a lot more information. I need a lot more knowledge. I need a lot more collaboration, alignment across the different disciplines, business, IT, compliance, etc., to really move the needle. And so Informatica helped them to actually break out of that silo, to not just start and end with these governance items, but have them as a starting point to something far richer, far more contextual, far more collaborative, that can be leveraged to drive real value. Okay, second one. Go beyond the data definitions. Too often the data governance practice is stuck in those definitional aspects, that the alignment that we need across the data landscape and the data effort somehow is reduced to data definition. If only we align on semantics, business glossary, taxonomy, model, then all of a sudden automatically everything else will align. That spaghetti will nicely lay out in railroad tracks, because we've aligned on definitions, and that's definitely not the case. In order to align, just if you would look at your own personal lives, you would align with others' definitions and the dictionary. That's only one part of it, and speaking the same language, you would need to align on purpose, on values, on outcomes, on timelines. All of these good things, pressures are relevant. And so it's a far broader effort and understanding that we need, and not just data for definition. So we need to stop worshipping the data definitions and then just have hope for the best, that there will be alignment and people will come to your governance effort just because you have good definitions. Good example, a recent example was US medical tech that spent years on creating their glossary and taxonomy, and only, of course, does it lack any context and relevance, and the materiality was never part of that world. Also, because you have a model, you have a singular view, each time you onboard a new area, you kind of need to fold them into that view, and without upsetting the conventions and the structures you already have made. So it doesn't really scale. If that's, you're actually trying to cater for all of the firm and all of the richness within the firm, all within a singular view, that's very tricky. And so we at Informatica helped this particular medical tech company to break out those definitions, to have far more richer set of metadata, not just the classical metadata efforts, but understand business usage, business processes, business projects, other business domains, privacy, and create that rich graph-based view to allow to really expose a path to value, to drive collaboration across the disciplines. And that's really been quite an eye-opening and fueled a whole new set of behaviors and perception of the data governance office at that particular firm. Okay, another critical element in a successful, value-driven and enabling governance program is that we don't go in with a policing-only mentality. Yeah? Governance is always the wrong connotation. Governance is about policing, it's about restricting, it's about setting rules and checking compliance. Well, that immediately, and I'm sure we all feel it as well, these type of conversations, we just, the hairs at the back of our neck just raise and say, hey, that's probably not going to help me much. That's not really a balanced conversation that I'm willing to have. And so very controlled, focused, and bureaucratic efforts are often bypassed. They're very slow to move because they're not in tune with reality. They don't really consider input and are not really bi-directional. So often they're obsolete very quickly. And so what we want to move towards is a model where we have great proactive participation, and people participate and align when there's alignment on the principles, the values, the guidelines. And so that's really where we should focus most of the effort. Once people align on value and on principles, then it's very easy to have a two-way conversation, and within those boundaries, work out the right solutions. So most people would join you at your data table to have meaningful data conversations, you win. The phone wins. We can become data-driven because we've reached a lot of people, we've infused the right behavior in a lot of people. If only a few come to us, if it would be the stewards or some data-savvy folk, you know what, that's never going to be enough to be data-driven. So we need to really almost like flip things around. And one of the aspects in getting people to engage is, of course, making it dead easy for them to engage and also to extract value from what you're doing. And easy is not just an easy and a sexy piece of software, also makes it, we need to make it very relevant and valuable for those that are engaging. And so context, as we already discussed, not just classical data artifacts and data speak, which is very difficult for business people to engage with, but if you add to those classical governance artifacts, if you add business viewpoints, business context, then all of a sudden it makes it very easy for them to enter your world, to have those meaningful conversations and extract value because they understand how your data artifacts are now relevant in your day-to-day, in their day-to-day. Okay, great case study of the facilitation element is a global insurance company. They just by their very culture, and I wouldn't say across all their lines of business, but definitely in the data practice, was very much heavily siloed and control focused. And so the lead governance guy said, you know what, I don't trust my people, I don't trust the organization. Every change, whatever the change is, needs to be not just 4-hour checked, but equally approved by compliance. So it couldn't really be more heavy governance if you tried. And so irrespective of the mentality of the change, even if it was touching up a certain quality rule or lowering or changing some definition or changing some context, it all had to go through the same heavy approval. And so what happened is that those most involved, because of course you roll out in initial scopes, so this was a risk program first, and then it was on to another compliance program. And so those key stakeholders immediately get bombarded with a lot of requests, and so they all just never look at it, just bulk approve, because it's not a meaningful conversation. You're piped into some standard workflow that isn't considerate to the context in which that change operates, to the very nature of the change. And so it had the opposite effect. Rather than saying, hey, let's have good, validated changes, now everybody's just bulk approving without even looking at it. Just the click, it's the worshipping of the click more than anything else. And so we worked with them to change the very approach and said, right, in the long term, what you want is that enabling practice. If you have a more enabling practice, you enable others to do well, because everybody needs in your data, everybody relies on data. You know what, that builds great partnerships with your business communities. That's really giving you a path to be relevant and valuable as a data practice. And we provided, of course, the tooling to do so. Again, far more broader in the knowledge side of things than just definitions and metadata, equally the business context, the privacy and compliance elements, so the whole stack that Informatica offered, and the ability to collaborate across those. Okay, embrace the chaos. Maybe a bit of a catchy title. There's something in for those that have a bit of experience in chemistry, chaos and entropy. There's a lot of energy in something that is chaotic, and so that energy is good. I mean, there's lots of activity. So if in a lot of organizations where there's lots of change, people say, oh, we can't really introduce governance because there's already so many other programs running. Well, actually, when there is change, when there is activity, when people are opening boxes and making changes, this is the ideal time to infuse the right behaviors and to add value. Because every single of those projects will need to open boxes, understand the as is, change things, engage with people. That's really ideal. They're already in that change mentality, and in the mentality of, and in the need for help. And so that's really where you want to infuse yourself. And so don't be the data governance implementation where your efforts are merely focused on some purist artifact creation. You want to have your data models, you want to have your ontology and taxonomies. The world isn't really served just, or the organization isn't really just served by just having some purist views. What you need is actually expose the messy reality of today and allow people to make sense of it and provide a structure where they can collaborate, where they can incrementally, hopefully, and as part of a continuous process, do better. And again, where vision and direction is clear, but you have a means to work it out at a local level. So a great example of that was actually an Irish financial institution where they spent many years on agreeing an enterprise data model, again in the classical thinking that when you align on semantics, somehow everything else will follow suit. And they had even business participation, but of course limited, defining some concepts. But then the whole result of that effort is that very complex enterprise data model that only modelers can really engage and leverage. And also it's very poor in business context. So you have an artifact that potentially holds a lot of value, but only a small group can leverage it. And so that's where it breaks down. And it's also a very purist, abstracted view. And so what actually the business was crying out for was just show me the mess, show me the spaghetti, but then show me how it all intersects. Show me which client onboarding processes use which data elements, irrespective of its position in the data model, and where there's misalignment, where there's sorting, where there's quality measurement, and not. And if we then at some point can see how they link up to the enterprise data model to actually inform strategic view, that would be great. But what we need is a pragmatic and practical view. And they were very lucky. They hired an interim CDO that had the most pragmatic experience and background. And together with Informatica, we really turned it around into quite a success story. And in fact, one of the last efforts before the interim CDO kind of moved on to a new firm was the EU regulator going in and doing an audit around BCBS 239, some banking regulation, and they were found best in class because of the pragmatic solution. A pragmatic solution lots of people could engage with, meaning it could affect behaviors, or it was affecting behaviors, it was aligning behaviors within the risk practice. It wasn't just some sort of data model and artifact that was there as a tick in a box. Okay, last but not least, do less, achieve more. So remember, I started out saying the brief is to enable the firm to do better. Large modern firms, we all want to be data-driven. Data is at the core of what we do. Data is the language in which we do business. And so we're only going to be data-driven as a firm if we can bring scale. If that's not just a pocket of data management practices and some good ETLs, no, it needs to infuse the entire firm. That data is what we do. Data is a core asset to the firm. So we need to get to scale. We're only going to get to scale to really have that democratization attitude. Will make it easy for anyone to understand in a few clicks what's going on, and provide a path to collaborate and to align. Yeah? And if most people in the firm, most of the time, make the right choices, and these could be as easy, it's not the right choices in a data model, it's just the right choices, reuse what's already there, even if it isn't the golden source, but some report that someone else already created, or some view that someone else already created, or aligns with what's already there, rather than misalign and have rework later on. So very, very simple behavioral changes have a massive compounded effect over a longer timeline. So here again, people, engagement, and a part to value, collaborating across the disciplines are absolutely key to scale. A lot of steps in the right direction are going to win it over time, not your best possible data model, best possible definitions. You want to start providing a view that is engaging to most. Great example was an actually fairly recent example. Was a US healthcare provider where they had very much the classical stewardship approach, we often refer to as a kind of first generation data governance approach, where, you know what, governance is going to be carried by the chosen few. Select your, or elect, or hire your chosen data stewards, and they're very passionate and savvy about data, and they will somehow carry the mantle. Well, that doesn't scale across the firm. And so they hired a lot of data stewards. Those data stewards were nicely representing the respective organizations in the council and the workflows and all of that governance silo effort that we've already discussed. And you know what, at some point, someone or enough people are going to realize that's not really adding much. You know, that's really, you can report how busy the governance organization has been, but value and value statement is almost kind of a leap of faith. It's not that obvious. Well, it should be obvious. If your data artifacts are linked to the way the business operates, so your data artifacts and your business metadata around processes and capabilities and projects and regulation, if that is all part of your view, that multidimensional view, then it's very obvious. It's as obvious what your definitions are and how they support your firm. And that's something that enables not the stewards, but enables the firm at large. And so with the help of us, we got that effort repositioned with a strong focus on democratization, not relying on the chosen few, but actually enabling everyone, or irrespective of skill level, to make sense of the most important data assets that were out there as part of that implementation, and providing a platform where that understanding could translate into the right behaviors, with more responsible behaviors. So, I think it's time for some questions. Let's see, Thomas, what did we get in?
Sure. Well, while you were talking, as you can imagine, a number of questions came in, Patrick. And as you said in step 4 here in the foundations, embrace the chaos. I've been over here trying to organize that chaos and try to give you a handful of questions that we can kind of line up with your narrative. So there's been some really good ones that came in. One of the early ones that I just thought, boy, this is a great one for Patrick to kind of weigh in on is, how do I convince my boss that now is the time to finally fix this data governance problem?
I often get that question in terms of it's now a good time to start, because there's always other priorities. And so I think the only mistake you can make is not to start. And so when we, and Thomas, you're aware of that as well, when we engage with organizations, and there's always a sales process, of course, and then they say, hey, you know what, the budget doesn't really get to priority funding, there's other things to do, let's come back in 18 months. But then you think, how much can we do in 18 months? Data is only going to be more important to your firm and to your competitors, and by the way, to your regulators. If all of a sudden a core asset, as data is now to the modern firm, is just, you know what, not given the right priority in terms of understanding. If only, forget like fixing and actually aligning, but just understanding what is core, where does it reside, how does it support the firm. Even those basic views, there is no excuse to wait. And every time to start is a good time. And as we were discussing, the more change there is, that is a great time to infuse the right behavior and to help these guys, because every project has a reliance on data. So don't wait. Start, Start small, think big, all of these good things. But there never was a better time than now to start caring about your data.
Yeah, it's an amazing perspective. Right now is the time. Now is the time to get involved. And to that end, there's a great question here around scaling across the enterprise, around getting more people involved. The question really is, how do I get more people involved? My team seems to be the only people who care. I feel like we hear this all the time, don't we?
True, and but it's of course not true. That other people might express it in different ways. And so, if you are experienced in the data governance game, and so you probably speak a slightly different language than what your business counterparts will speak, and you'll express it in different ways. So you will say, hey, as an experienced data practitioner, I understand I need a good structure and classification for my data models. And so I will have a business glossary, an ontology, taxonomy, and I of course need the metadata. And so all the hard elements you typically have a good grasp on. But business users, and business in the broader sense, business and operations and compliance and HR, they typically express their data concerns and data needs in a very different manner. They would go through different lenses. And so they would speak in terms of my processes require data, my capabilities, my compliance efforts. And so they express it differently, but they all care because they understand that a lot of their operations, a lot of their capabilities just fall down. They break down if the data isn't there or isn't right. And so, again, there's quite a good time now where we see a lot of these conversations now meet up, where it's not just the governance and the data savvy, the data management office that is crying out for data governance capabilities. It is actually that business audience that says, I want to better understand what's going on and how to align what's already out there into my neighbors, really. Yeah,
so true, so true. And to that end, there's another question that kind of lines up really nicely with that, and it's the person says, I loved what you said about breaking out of the silos. Now, do you have any recommendations for dealing with two different groups that both think that they're doing data governance correctly, but have completely different opinions? Good question.
It is a good it is a good question. Now, so one thing to say, so if you're in that data governance silo, you typically your view is also quite siloed and singular. And so in the classical governance practice, we say, hey, so the way I look at the world and really and the firm, I will have my data classification and data structure, and I will classify that in the way I see the firm operate. I will have my product data, my customer data, my supplier data, these good things. And so when a new group enters, and it might be a competing group in terms of the data efforts, or it's actually a group that wants to join, or it is a compliance group or a business group. So if all of a sudden you get diversity, but you only have that one singular view in your silo, you will struggle. Because it doesn't scale, and you can't really reconcile all views into the one thing. At some point, something needs to give. And so what we typically, why the Informatica stack in its second generation here is so powerful, is that we cater for a great number of views. We'll kind of, as we said, embrace the chaos. You could almost say embrace the diversity. It's more important that diverse groups actually join the conversation at the table, that we can connect the dots in this graph model. You have a certain view on the world, I have a certain view of the world, but we can see where the touch points are and we can see where the disconnect is. But that's more important than actually arguing and bickering for the next few years to somehow try and align on the one model and then never achieve it, yeah? And alienating people. I don't know if that answered it, or I don't know if the...
No, I think that does. And I think that's a good perspective too. You know, this is about collaboration. This is about working together, and it is about the same common goal, right? So that's a good perspective. And you know, there's another good question that sort of lines up with that same mentality. I think we kind of hit a nerve here with the narrative before, but this person says we have our IT team involved and my lines of business are bought in, but we struggle to agree on which projects to tackle. So they kind of add onto that. We're trying to do things slow and show worth, but how do we prioritize the projects? How do we know which one to take first? It's a good question.
Yeah, and a good one as well. When we get often. So if your capabilities, not just as an organization, but equally in terms of supporting capability in terms of tool set, because at an enterprise level you need some sort of tooling support. If that is all very low, you just want to be a bit more conservative. Yes, you take on not the most high profile and biggest and most risky project, but no, you would say, right, let's start a bit smaller. Let's say 2 or 3 of kind of mid-level projects, support those, so provide them with the right data views and business relevance views that they need, and you go from there. If you're a bit more mature, you know what, you can be a bit more ambitious, but you typically only have really one good shot at this. It's about people, it's about building relationships and trust, having meaningful conversations. So typically you want to get it right the first time. You can make mistakes, but you want to have that structure in place to do it in a meaningful manner and improve as you go. So don't be overly ambitious on day one, but take something mid-tier then if you're not too mature.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. You had said earlier too, the whole think big, start small mentality too, just as a good mantra to keep in mind. We also have, I don't know if all of you have checked out governyourdata.com before, but if you want to check that out, there's this really great business opportunity assessment out there that sort of will plot your projects on a heat map that will more or less pinpoint what are some of the good ones that give high value, but also are ones that are attainable for you to tackle. It's I found that it's a good exercise to go through with groups, is to sit down and everybody kind of plug in their opportunities, and it helps to make some decisions. So just a helpful resource out there. If you haven't checked out governyourdata.com, it's a good website to help with that. Let's see, I'm just grab 1 or 2 more here, Patrick. There's some questions about tools, but we'll just get a general one here. How do I make the business case to invest in some data governance tools? Any recommendations on business case, Pat?
It used to be a lot more difficult because definitely in the kind of with the sponsors, with the executive level, yes, data was important, but you know what? It's all hanging together. We're doing the ETLs. We're moving data into lakes. It's okay. Why do we need data governance and workflows? That sounds like a lot of overhead. And so it used to be always, typically, you had to make some sort of a strategic use case, a case study, and saying, right, it's difficult to all tally it up and say we're going to spend 100 and in 3 years we're going to get a return on investment. But strategically, you probably want to move into that. And it's like strategically, you want to probably move into DevOps. Strategically, you probably, for some part of your business, want to move into cloud. And so these strategic use cases, we kind of quite comfortably could make and assist customers with. We see that to be a lot easier nowadays because, or in recent periods, where not only has been an inundation of regulatory programs that have data at their heart. So we're looking at the GDPRs of this world, the CCPAs of this world, and IMDP and pharma, et cetera, et cetera. But equally, I don't think there's an executive anymore in the corporate world that wouldn't argue that having some base understanding, a readily available view that says, right, what data do we hold as a firm? What is the relevance of it? Where does it reside? How does it hang together? Who's involved? Some basic questions answered. I think most would go for that. So it might not be a fully fledged and all singing and dancing data governance implementation, but the business case to get basic questions answered, to build up a foundation of knowledge and a collaborative platform around it, we see that to be pretty straightforward these days.
Yeah, that's great, Pat. We're going to just slide one more question in here at the end. I know we haven't had an opportunity to answer every question here, but don't worry. If you submitted, we got your questions, we captured them. We'll follow up directly with you. But one last really quick, easy question. Pat, I'll even just take it for you. Just love the success stories that you shared, any that I can share with my boss. I'm glad you asked because we actually did put we put a link to a success story over in the attachment section. If you haven't checked that out yet, please do so. There's some great success stories out there, but I just chose one to attach to this, which is the McGraw-Hill education story. McGraw-Hill education is a wonderful one that you can share across your organization. There's some great quotes in there. To that end, if you haven't checked it out already, please do take a moment and check out the attachments pane. I went ahead and put the slides from today over there. Also, a lot of what Pat shared with each of you here today on this webinar is equally covered in an ebook that we published called Reimagining Data Governance. And it's sort of rethinking the way that you tackle data governance. And then again, we also put over there the McGraw-Hill education story for you to take a look at. So if you haven't done that, please do so. And once again, thank you for the questions. Pat, thank you so much for taking a few minutes here today to share some incredible insight with each of us. And to each of you out there, thanks for spending the last 30, 40 minutes here with us. We really appreciate it. From all of us here at Informatica, thank you for taking some time and spending the day with us. We appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.